Hey there, and welcome to the next video in the series of videos that I'm putting together for the Intro to Web Dev course. In the last couple weeks, we've learned about the fundamentals of HTML and the fundamentals of CSS and using CSS to create not just styles, but layouts as well. And last week, you would have learned about the fundamentals of JavaScript and specifically using JavaScript to make the page interactive and do DOM manipulation and all that good stuff. Last week, we also learned about using variables and creating functions. And so this week, we are going to sort of continue on the JavaScript path and learn about a feature called if statements. So as per tradition, I am going to run through basically the content that's in this written tutorial in video format, so that you can use whichever style makes the most sense to you. Cool. Anyway, without further ado, what I'm going to do is get my coding environment set up real quick. So what I have prepared is my GitHub directory, and I have the Scratch directory here, which just has an index file in it that I'm going to open in Atom. And it's right now a mostly empty file, and that's good because all I really want to use it for is testing out some code and talking through it. And I'm also going to open that up in my browser. I think I already did that step actually. Yep, it's here. So right now it's just empty, but that's cool because I just want to kind of play with it. So here we are. I've got my code editor on the left and my rendered HTML on the right. So right now it's empty, but let's just say hello world, just to double check that everything's connected. I'm going to save that and I'm going to refresh over here, and indeed it is. So here we go. We've got code and we've got output. I'm going to be doing a bunch of JavaScript stuff in this video, and now I'm debating whether I want to put it in like a style tag, or in a script tag by itself. And I could do it this way, or I could do the sort of more canonical, like more official, more realistic style of doing script source and then having like a script.js file. I think actually I'll do it this way. It doesn't actually really matter, but I'll choose this way. What am I doing? I want to open a folder, and it's this folder. Oh my god. Okay, so all right, there it is. There's my directory, and now I can kind of switch between my index file and my script.js file. Fine. And right now I just have a load function. I'm going to get rid of this actually, and I'm going to just put something like document.write hello world again. This one will have a bunch of exclamation points just to make sure that I have my JavaScript connected. And there we go. There's the output from the JavaScript. So I'm going to delete the HTML actually, because I don't actually care about HTML for now. And so the content of the page will be purely based on what I put in this JavaScript file. So let me refresh that, and we'll see only that. I can make it bigger, but this is coming from the JavaScript now. Okay, so all of that was just set up just to get the files working and connected to the browser and whatnot. And now we're going to dive into the actual content. So one thing that we learned about last week would have been variables and types. So for example, you can have a string type. So I'll say like let message equals, and then put a series of characters in here. Hello world. I'm going to get sick of writing world, so I'm going to say maybe like hello string type, whatever. So I've stored this string, this value, which is of the string type, in this variable, and now I can use this variable. And I'm saving it and I'm refreshing, and we see that my message here is indeed printed to the web page. Okay, so that's the string type. Another one that we talked about is numbers. So I can say let whatever, answer equals 42. And again, this does not have quotes around it because it's not a string, it's a number, and we talked about that last week, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But if you are kind of confused about that, that's fine. Maybe go back and review the discussion on types last week. But here we go. I can refresh this and I see 42. So what I want you to sort of take away from this, which is really just a review of last week, is you can have values. Those values can have types, and you can store those values in variables. So that's the review. So we're going to build on that this week, and what I'm going to introduce is a new type, and that type is called Boolean, and it's a kind of a goofy word that's kind of funny. It's spelled this way, Boolean. And it is a specific kind of value that can only have two different values. It's a specific type that can only have two values, and those values are either true or false. It's yes or no. It's literally true or false. So I can say like, is daytime equals false, because right now it's nighttime for me right now, so I'm going to put false. And this value, like, notice that it's not a string because it doesn't have quotes around it, but it's also not a number because, it's not a number. It's a special kind of type that is a Boolean that can only be true or false. So I can print that out here as well. And you see that the value is indeed false. So that's Booleans. You can switch it to true if you want, but you can't do much else with a Boolean by itself. That's kind of the point of Booleans. They can either be true or false. That's it. No other values. And that might seem useful, but we'll get into why it's useful as this video sort of progresses. So next, what I want to talk about is operators. So back when we were thinking about numbers and strings, you could use operators like the append operator on a string. So I could say hello Kevin here, and I can print out my message, and it will be hello and Kevin added together, kind of appended together, smushed together. And you could use, things like multiplication. So I can do 43 times 3. This is the multiplication operator, and I can print that out. And we get whatever the result is. So the way operators work is you kind of take two values and you create another value. So let me maybe talk about some relational operators now. So multiplication kind of multiplies two numbers together. You can also have other operators that compare two values. So you can think of these as inequalities from algebra class. So let's say I actually have a variable called like current hour maybe, and I'm going to say it's like, we're going to do like military style. So like midnight is 0, and then it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way, and then noon is 12, and then 1 p.m. will be like 13. 2 p.m. will be 14, and so on. It's currently 6 p.m. for me, so what is that? That's 18, I think. So my current hour is 18, which represents 6 p.m. And now if I want to calculate, is it currently daytime, what I can do is say let isDay equals to the result of comparing current hour to, let's say 17. Let's say daytime ends at 5 p.m. And so taking a look at this is an operator that takes two values. In this case, we are feeding in current hour, which is 18, and comparing it to 17. It's saying, is current hour less than 17? The result of that operator is a Boolean. It's either true or it's false. And we can print that out. Let me maybe expand this a little bit. isDay, I'll use the append operator here, and I'm going to print it out. So isDay is false, and that might make sense because 18 is not less than 17. It is false that 18 is less than 17. So if I change this to, I don't know, let's say 11, so it's 11 a.m. Currently in our theoretical code here. If I refresh this, isDay is true because 11 is indeed less than 17. So that's relational operators. There are other ones, there's greater than, there's equal to. You can use 2 equals or 3 equals. JavaScript is a little weird. And there's like less than or equal to. If you want to have more information on that, you know what I'm going to say. Go to your favorite search engine and you can type in something like JavaScript, I don't know, relational operators probably. And you'll get all kinds of resources. Here's MDN, which, yeah, you get all kinds of information, all kinds. Or you can just say maybe like inequality operator. Yeah, so these are other ways to get information. Maybe I'll just say like less than operator. So if you want to learn more about the different kinds of relational operators, then here's how you would do that, just by researching and reading more in the tutorials and whatnot. Okay, so that is relational operators, and you can use them to sort of create a Boolean value out of your other variables and values. So for example, here's current hour less than 17. We are comparing whether it's before 5 p.m. here, and that creates a Boolean using a relational operator. Okay, so next I want to talk about Boolean operators, and let's see what example I want to use. So I don't know. Let's forget about the day stuff for a second. Let's say I want to calculate. I actually don't remember what example I used down here. Right. Okay. So let's say I have a couple of Boolean operators. Let's say we are talking about animals. And I want to say let Ken fly equals, I don't know, some Boolean number or some Boolean value, either true or false, and let Ken swim equals, in this case, let's say false. Now I want to calculate is the animal a duck. So maybe we'll say is duck. These variable names, like other variables, they can be anything you want. I am using naming conventions that say can and is, because those are common indicators that a variable holds a Boolean type, but it's up to you. You can name them whatever you want. And I'm going to say something is a duck if it can both fly and swim. I know that that's not perfectly accurate for you animal nerds out there, but for demonstration purposes, I'm going to say that if you can fly and you can swim, then you're a duck. So the way I do that is I type can fly, and then I use the and operator, which is in this case 2 ampersands, and can swim. So this might look a little weird, but it's very similar to any other operator like plus or multiply or divide or subtract. It takes 2 values, in this case 2 Boolean values, and combines them in some way and gives you a third Boolean. So in this case, the and operator gives you a Boolean of true if both sides of it are true. So if you can fly and you can swim, then you're a duck. So I'm going to print that out. Document.write. I actually don't remember. Duck plus is duck. So let me refresh. And we get false because our animal cannot swim. Maybe it's a bird, but not a duck, So if I change this to true, then I refresh. Now it is a duck because it both can fly and can swim. Okay, so that's the and operator. And again, if you want more information, you can type JavaScript, I don't know, and operator probably, into your favorite search engine, and here you go, logical and this operator, and you can get more information all about it. But I want to maybe just stop there at the high level. So next I want to talk about the OR operator, which works a lot like the AND operator, but you can maybe guess at what it does. So for example, I don't know, let me comment this out. Will this work? Yeah, just comment everything out, and I'm going to start with, let's say like is Saturday equals true, and let is Saturday equal false. And I want to say like let is it the weekend? Is weekend, and I want to say it's the weekend if is Saturday, or, and the OR operator is two, they're called pipes, which is maybe weird if you've not seen them before, but it's the symbol that's, for me, it's above my enter key, but I have to type shift and then backslash to get to it. If you're not sure where the pipe key is on your keyboard, let me know. We can find it. But it's two vertical lines is the OR operator. So we're going to say is Saturday or is Sunday. So maybe this will work kind of how you might expect it to work in real life. It's the weekend if it's Saturday or if it's Sunday. If either one of these things is true, then it's the weekend. So I can print that out as well. Document.write weekend plus is weekend. Sure. So I'm going to refresh this, and it should say, well, it doesn't say nothing. Why? Because I missed something probably. Let's look at my console. Is Saturday, okay. Is Saturday, is Sunday. Whoops. I'm leaving that in because that kind of mistake and that kind of debugging is a totally normal part of coding, and it'll happen, so it's okay. Refresh, and I don't get any errors, and now weekend is true. And weekend is true because it says, is Saturday true? It is, and it actually doesn't even bother checking if it's Sunday because it got to true, but it doesn't really matter. It's the weekend because either one of these things is true. So you have the AND operator, which evaluates to true if both sides are true, and you have the OR operator, which evaluates to true if either side is true. So you can work with both. Next, let's talk about the NOT operator, which is actually a little different than the rest. So I'm going to build on this, and I want to say I have some logic that calculates if it's the weekend, and so to calculate if it's a weekday, I'll say let is weekday, and since I've already calculated is the weekend, I can figure out whether it's a weekday just by reversing that. So kind of like taking a negative if it's a number. So I'm going to set is weekday equal to not, which is an exclamation point, is weekend. So in this case, the operator comes first, and then you have your value, and it's only a single value, which is a little different. Most of the other operators we've seen kind of come in between two values. In this case, it just operates on a single value and reverses it. So whatever is weekend is, the not operator will reverse it. If it's true, it becomes false. If it's false, it becomes true. And we store that value in weekday. So let's say weekday and refresh. So in this case, weekday is true. Oh, because I forgot to change my variable. Another dumb mistake, but whatever, it's normal. If I refresh, now it's false. And it's false because it's Saturday, so is weekend is true. Therefore, is weekday is false. So just to demonstrate that, let's say it's also not Saturday. So it's not Saturday and it's not Sunday. Therefore, the OR operator will evaluate to false because is Saturday or is Sunday. It's neither one of those things. Therefore, it's false. And then is weekday reverses that to make it true. And there you go. And I'll maybe just pause real quick and say, like, notice how I read my code. I read it line by line, and I think about exactly what each line of code is doing before I skip down to the next one. That's a really important skill to sort of build up as you are learning how to code. And it honestly doesn't come super naturally. I think a lot of folks have a tendency to want to kind of skim because that's how we read. Honestly, we read like written language mostly by skimming, And we can get the gist of a paragraph without reading every single word, but with code it's a little different. You kind of have to read every single line to make sure that you understand what it's doing. So that's something I do all the time, and it's something that I'll try to show examples of in these videos. Okay, we are just about done with talking about Boolean operators. The only other thing I want to mention is that you can combine them. So let's say I didn't have is weekend here. I only had is it Saturday or is it Sunday? And I wanted to calculate whether it's the weekday. What I could do is I could say something like, I don't know, is weekday is equal to it not being Saturday and it not being Sunday. So you can combine multiple Boolean operators in the same line exactly the way you can do like let number equals 2 times 3 minus 4 plus 7, whatever. That's not a plus. Plus 7. You know, this is a valid line because it's combining multiple values using different operators in the exact same way that this is a valid line that is combining multiple values using different operators. The operators might look a little goofy, but once you're more used to the syntax, you read them the same way. You look at each part of it. You can say, all right, this is Saturday, which is false. This not operator makes it true. Okay, keep that in mind. Is Sunday is false. This makes it true. Okay, so we have true and true, which means is weekday will also be true. So keep in mind that you can combine multiple Boolean values to create a new Boolean value. Okay, that is as far as I want to go on Boolean operators. And again, I've probably said this a million times now, and I'm going to say it a million times more. If that wasn't quite enough, if you want to learn more about Boolean operators, go to your favorite search engine, type in JavaScript Boolean operators, and you'll learn a lot more. And you can get really into the weeds if you want to. For our purposes, I don't think you'll necessarily need that knowledge, but if you are curious, that's where you would go for more information. Okay, so all of that was to get us to a point where we could talk about if statements. So we know about Booleans and we know about combining them, and now we want to do something with them. So let me go back to my example of having like a current hour. And let's pretend that it's, I don't know, 7 a.m. It's a little too early for me, but it's just an example, so I'm not going to let it bother me too much. Okay, so it's currently 7 a.m. and what I want to do is print out, I don't know, good morning or good night. And I could say like document.write good morning, and I could refresh, and there we have good morning. But I only want to do this if current hour is before 12, if it's in the AM, let's say. And so what I can do is create a new Boolean value exactly like we just saw before. So like is day, and what I'm going to say is day equals current hour less than 12. So I'm saying like day is morning. Maybe I should say is morning actually. Morning. So is morning is equal to current hour being less than 12. And I only want to print this if is morning is true. And that's where if statements come in handy. So what I can do is type the keyword if, and then in parentheses, I'm going to have parentheses, and in the parentheses you type a Boolean. In this case, I'm going to say is morning. And then after the parentheses, you have an open curly brace, and then a closed curly brace, and then you give yourself some white space, and then inside of the curly braces you put any code that you want to execute when the Boolean is true. So I'm going to save that, I want to refresh, and hopefully nothing changes because our current hour is 7. 7 is less than 12. So when I get here, I say if is morning, so it's if true, then I do indeed do this. And to demonstrate the sort of power of that, let's say it's 1 p.m. actually. Now I'm going to refresh this, and we see that nothing prints out. And that's because we have current hour being 1 p.m. When we get here, we say, is current hour less than 12? Is 13 less than 12? No, it's not. Therefore, this evaluates to the Boolean value false. So is morning equals false. Then we get to this if statement, and it says if false, and it says, you know what, that's false. So I'm actually not going to execute any of the code inside my curly braces. And so nothing happens. And that's the power of if statements right there. Now your code can make decisions based on the state of various variables and other things that we'll talk about in a second. But this lets the code make decisions. And this is the gist of an if statement. Okay, so before I continue, what I'm going to say is that this example is a little contrived, I guess. I've purposely split it up into multiple steps. I purposely have this separate step where I create a Boolean variable, and I store the result of this inequality in that Boolean variable before I move on to the if statement. But I did that just to demonstrate the steps that are happening, but you don't actually have to split it up into those steps. So for example, you can have the inequality directly in the if statement. And so I can delete this is morning variable. And this is a really common pattern. And you can maybe think about it in terms of like how you would talk about it just like using human language. Like if the current hour is less than 12, then it's morning, and I'll say good morning. And this works because this current hour less than 12, this evaluates to a Boolean value. So it's the exact same logic, but you're just not having that extra step of storing in a variable because you don't need to, unless you want to reuse the variable later. There's not really a point in it. So this syntax or this style of coding will be really common in code that you see online, and so it's probably what I'll stick with as well. You're welcome to split it up into multiple steps, though, if that's a little easier for you to think about. Okay, so next what I want to talk about is, so we've talked about if. Now, if the if statement has friends, basically. So right now we have a program or a web page that if it's before noon, then it'll say good morning, but if it's after noon, then it doesn't say anything. What if I wanted to say good night after noon, for example? And let's try something. So maybe I can just have some code hanging out here. Maybe I'll say document.write good night. And I'm not sure if this will break, honestly. Let's check. It doesn't break. So let's go with this. So we see good night, and maybe that's good, but let's see what happens if it's morning. So I'm going to change my current hour to 11. So it's 11 a.m. right now, and I'm going to refresh this. And we see good morning, good night, which is maybe a really quick day. But if you read through the code line by line, this might make sense. So what's happening is current hour is 11. We say if 11 is less than 12, and it is, we print out good morning. We reach the end of the if statement, and the code keeps going. It gets to this line, and then it prints out good night. And we don't want that. So the way we can get around that is something called the else statement, and that is the keyword else. It goes after an if statement. You need an if statement to have an else. You can't just have an else hanging out by itself, but after an if statement, you can say else, and then some curly braces, give yourself some white space, and then you can move your code into the body of the else statement, or the part of the else statement that's between the curly braces. Okay, so now we have an if-else statement where the if statement says, is the current hour less than 12? If it is, good morning. Otherwise, meaning if it's greater than or equal to 12, then we are going to write good night. So let me refresh this. I get good morning, and I can change this to, I don't know, 5 p.m. And now we get good night. Okay, so this pattern of like if and else makes your code pretty powerful because it lets you sort of branch. You can say go left or go right, or I don't know, put on a red shirt or a blue shirt in the morning. Those are dumb examples, but this is getting into the idea of your code taking different paths depending on the state of the code. In this case, the state is the current hour variable. Next, what I want to talk about is maybe else if. So we have else here. Let me get rid of that for a second. Right now, what happens if, I don't know, it's 1 p.m. If it's 1 p.m., then we are going to say good night, because right now we are defining morning as before noon and night as afternoon. And at 1 p.m., depending on your schedule, it's probably not nighttime yet. So we don't want to say good night until it's some other conditional is true. So I'm going to maybe just delete this else for a minute. And what I can have instead is something called the else if statement. And it's similar to else, and it's actually similar to if. It's kind of both combined, but it comes after an if statement, and I can say else if, and then in parentheses, I'll have some logic. In this case, I'm going to say like if current hour is greater than 17. Then I want to say document.write good night. Okay, and so we can read through this code maybe just logically at first. So we have current hour is 13. We say if current hour is less than 12, it's not. So we skip down to the else if, and we say else if current hour is greater than 17, and it's also not. So I'm going to refresh this, and I expect to see nothing. And I do. Okay, so let's change this to, I don't know, 18, which is what, 6 p.m. So we can refresh, and now we have our good night. So we have if and we have else if, and these are checking different conditions and executing some logic based on those conditions. You can also loop these, or not loop these, but you can combine these into a string. So and I don't mean string as like a string type. I mean just like one after the other. I should probably use a different term there. But right now, our code is kind of, I don't know, rigid, because we always say good morning. Like, what if it's, I don't know, 2 a.m.? Is it a good time to say good morning? Again, depends on your schedule, but if you say good morning to me at 2 a.m., I don't think I'm going to be very happy. So we want more conditions in our if statement. So let's kind of rewrite it that way. So I'm going to say like if current hour is less than, I don't know, maybe 6 a.m. or so. Then what I want to do is say document.write, I don't know, go back to bed, something like that. Then otherwise, else if it's between, so if it's not before 6, but it is before 12, then you're allowed to say good morning to me. That's fine. Then I'll say like maybe if it's less than maybe 5, again, I'll say like good afternoon maybe. And then maybe otherwise else, then I'll say document.write good night. And that was a lot of code to write without testing it, honestly. So let's refresh it and see how we feel about it. So 2 a.m. we say go back to bed, which is good because 2 a.m. is too early to be awake. If it's, let's say, 10 a.m., what am I going to say? And again, reading through the code line by line is super, super, super important. So current hour is 10. Is current hour less than 6? No, this evaluates to false, so it's going to jump down to the next else if. Is current hour less than 12? It is. Therefore, it's going to execute this code. And here's where the sort of power of the if, else if combination comes in. Once we reach an if that evaluates to true, in this case it's going to be current hour is less than 12, none of the other logic will execute. So it'll jump down here and keep going after the whole thing exits. But in this case, for example, current hour is equal to 10 right now. When we get to this if statement, this will evaluate to true and it'll print, and you might expect it to keep going. So you might expect it to now run is current hour less than 17. This is actually true. It is less than 17, but because we first triggered this part of the if statement, it won't even check these, and the code will jump down and keep going down here without checking any other if statements. Anyway, that was a lot of rambling, but the idea is that it'll only run one block in the if, else lines. So let me refresh, and now we see good morning. And I'm just kind of confirming that my code works, honestly, that I didn't make any mistakes. So let's keep going. Now at 2 a.m., I should see good afternoon, and I do. And now after 5 p.m., so let's say it's 7 p.m. here, now I should see good night. And yeah, there we go. So here's a sort of example of an if, else block of code. And I want to spend some time and maybe, hopefully quickly, go back to this logic of how if statements work and why they are powerful. And in the written tutorial, I wrote about it here in avoiding unnecessary checks. So it's kind of convoluted, honestly, but if you want a written version of what I'm about to say, I would go there. But the idea again is that the if statement only runs one of the bodies. And so once we get to like here, so let's say my current hour is, I don't know, let's say 10. So I should say good morning, and I do. But let's look at this a little closer. Let me maybe add some white space just to make it a little easier to see. So I'm looking at this one right here. So I only want to say good morning if the current hour is between the hours of 6 a.m. and noon. I don't want to say good morning if it's before 6 a.m. and I don't want to say good morning if it's after noon, because those are different times of day. So if I look at this line really only checks if it's less than 12. So why isn't it also checking if it's greater than 6? Like, why don't I do this? Current hour greater than or equal to 6, and why doesn't the if statement need to look like this? And the answer to that question is, when the computer gets to this if statement, it already knows that the current hour is greater than or equal to 6. And the reason it knows that is because this if statement, this if statement here asks that question. This if statement says, is the current hour less than 6? And if it's not, then we know that the current hour is not less than 6, therefore it must be greater than or equal to 6. And it keeps checking. It skips over the body, so it does not print go back to bed, and it jumps down to this line. So at this point, we already know that current hour is greater than or equal to 6, therefore we don't need to do that check. And that's the power of the if statement and else if and else structure. You don't have to recheck the variable every single time, because that's built into how if and else work. So if you're, I don't know, curious about that, try rewriting this program only using if statements, without using else if or else at all. Try that, and you'll see that you end up writing a lot more code, than if you rely on the structure of the if statement, where it only executes one of the bodies and it won't execute any of the later bodies, and you can keep assuming that the calculations that were done above remain true. So if we skip this line, then we know that this was false. And when we get to this line, we can assume that that is still true, or that is still false in this case. Again, I think that's really confusing, and honestly, I don't think I'm doing a good job of explaining it super well. So I would recommend reading through it here if you are still unclear, and rewriting this using if statements. That can be a little challenge for you. Write this code without any else keywords at all, and I think you'll start to see what I mean. Okay, the very last thing I want to talk about with Booleans and if statements, and I'm really only talking about this because it's a thing you'll hear about when you read about JavaScript on the internet, and if you don't have a sort of primer, it can be a little bit confusing and alienating. And that is the idea of truthiness. So we've seen examples where we've done things like, I don't know, like let x equals 17, a string times 3, and then I can document write x and refresh. And this works, but it shouldn't work, right? Because 17 is a string and 3 is a string, so this should be an error. Like, what if this is, I don't know, cat? What happens? And what happens is I get this weird not a number error. So why does this work? And the answer is something called type coercion, where JavaScript gets to this line and it says, wait a second, you're trying to multiply two strings together. Are you sure? I think those might be numbers. And then it looks and it says these are indeed numbers, so I'm going to treat them as numbers actually. So that's type coercion. You're coercing or changing a type into a different type, in this case strings into numbers. And a similar thing happens with Booleans. So let me say like let x equals, I don't know, 29. And then I say if x, then document write hello world. So what would you expect to happen? I have an if statement which should take a Boolean, right? But instead I have a number. And so what should happen? Maybe it should throw an error. Maybe something weird should happen. I don't know. Let's refresh. And you see that this evaluates to true. If x, then I only will print hello world if this is true. And for some reason, 29 is true. What? And that comes down to something in JavaScript called truthiness. I don't think I'm making that up. Truthiness, yeah. And it's the same idea of type coercion. JavaScript is seeing that you are using a different type than it expected, so it's going to sort of convert it into a Boolean. And there are rules around what is true or what is truthy and what is falsy. So with numbers, 0 is false. So if I change this to a 0 and I go back to the web page and I refresh, then I don't see anything. Actually, let me maybe change this just a little bit so we can see either case. So I'm going to say true and else. Then I'm going to say document.write, and I'm going to say false here. So you can see either way. And so here you can see that x equaling 0 is false. And that's because of JavaScript truthiness. There are all kinds of rules about it. And I'm not going to go over every single rule, but here are the things that are false. 0 is false. If I have an empty string, that's also false. So like if I have cat, that's not an empty string, so that will be true. And if I have an empty string, then if I refresh that, then that's false. And you can read more about all kinds of weird corner cases and stuff. And honestly, this is one of the things that makes people kind of make fun of JavaScript, but there is logic to it. And this is also actually pretty handy for checking like whether you have a certain value. So when we talked about getting user input, a handy way to check whether the user entered anything is something like this. So actually, maybe I'll real quick just end the video with an example that does something like that. So let me add some stuff to the body. Let's add, I don't know, an input with an ID of input. I'm not super creative right now. And maybe button on click equals clicked, maybe. This is all just example stuff. Click me button. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'm going to refresh just to actually want to get rid of some of this code. Actually, I'm just going to get rid of all the code. And let's just refresh to make sure I have this and a click me. That's huge, but whatever. Okay, so now I need a clicked function, and this is just building on the stuff that we saw last week. I'm doing it kind of fast because this isn't actually the point of what I'm trying to talk about, but whatever. So we're gonna have alert, and I'm gonna say hello. And again, I'm just kind of building this out so that I can talk about it. So this code doesn't actually matter too much, but I'm gonna refresh this, click me, and I see hello. Okay. What I want to do is maybe get the input. Let input equals document dot get element by ID. And what did I call it? I think I called it input. And then let value equals input dot value. And then I'm going to say alert. You entered colon value. Whoops, I need a plus. Okay. So now I'm going to refresh and I'm going to type, I don't know, test. Click me, and you entered test. So I'm getting the input from the input, getting the value from it that the user typed, and then I'm printing it to this alert. And you know, we learned about DOM manipulation, so you could do other stuff with it. You could add it to the page, whatever. I'm just using alert because it's quicker, honestly. But what happens if I do something like this? So I've not entered anything, and I'm going to click me, and it says you entered blank, which is, you know, maybe not what you wanted. So what you can do with if statements is you can say something like if value, then I can say alert, I actually just want this, right? So if I have a value, then I'm going to show that value in the alert box. If I don't have a value, if this is falsy, then I can say something else like alert, enter a value, whatever, like show an error message, that kind of thing. So now if I refresh this and I hit click me, it'll say enter a value. So it's a way to check whether the values actually have values, whether the variables that you are working with actually have any values in them. And so this is why that idea of truthiness or falsiness comes in handy. The last thing I want to do, just because, you know, I'm here, is talk about the idea of like maybe using user input in an if statement. So let's say I want to, I don't know, say like create a quiz, for example. I mean, spoiler alert, there's a reason I'm doing that, but whatever. What's my favorite animal? Like I'm entering a quiz. So now I have what's my favorite animal, and I'm supposed to guess and then say click me. Okay, so I have the value, and I can then say if value equals, this is using one of those relational operators, in this case the equality operator. If it equals cat, then I'll say you win, and otherwise I'll say guess again. So again, the idea of reading through code is super important. I'm going to probably keep saying that, but before I refresh and try this, let's read through it line by line. So first of all, in the HTML, I create an input with an ID of input, and then I create a button with an onClick attribute of clicked, which means that when I click the button, it'll call this function. Okay, so now I go over to the JavaScript and I have this function. So when the button is clicked, this code runs, and I get the input element here, the ID with input. Then I get the value from that input element, and here I have an if statement that checks if value equals cat, then I will pop up an alert dialog that says you win, else, which means if the value is not cat, then I say guess again. Okay, so now I'm going to refresh, And what is my favorite animal? I'm going to say turtle. I'm going to click me, and it says guess again, because the value is not cat. Okay, so I'm going to maybe say cat instead. Click me, and I get you win because of this if statement, because of this branching logic that does one thing if the value is one value. Well, I shouldn't have used value here. If the variable is one value, and a different thing if the variable is a different value. So that is the idea of combining what we learned last week with this new concept of if statements to create this kind of interactive web page that does stuff based on the user input, and it can do one thing or another. I feel like there was one more thing I wanted to talk about, but I don't remember what it was. So I'll, okay, never mind. I think I'll end there, actually. So to summarize, what we talked about was everything in this written tutorial. So we talked about all of this stuff. We talked about Boolean values, which are a new type. We talked about relational operators, which are things like less than or greater than or equal to. And we talked about other kind of operators that combine Booleans into other Booleans, so like and or and not, and showing like a whole bunch of Booleans with mixing different operators together. So here's an example in the page. And then finally we talked about if statements, which let you check whether something is true or not and run some code only if that is true, if the thing you are checking is true. In this case, I'm checking is value cat, but we saw other examples like checking the time of day and whatnot. And we talked about else and else if, which you can often combine into that that longer block of if, else, else, that kind of thing, which is a very common pattern with if statements. And the power of that is to kind of avoid unnecessary checks. So once I have evaluated part of an if statement, I can kind of assume that I've kind of learned from that. So we saw before the idea of not needing to recheck the time. So once we got past is the current hour less than 5, I think earlier I used 6, but the idea is once I get past the first if statement, I can assume that this evaluated to false. So I don't have to rewrite that code over and over again to kind of check multiple conditions. And then finally, we talked about truthiness, and then we talked about combining what we learned last week with these new ideas of if statements and Booleans. Okay, so that's where I want to end this video. Thanks for watching. Of course, if you want more information, you can go to the written tutorial, or you can use your favorite search engine to get more information from websites like MDN and W3 Schools, and there's just a ton of JavaScript tutorials out there, and they are great places to get more information from. But for now, I'm going to say that's as far as I wanted to go. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.